Good afternoon, everybody. I think I'm a bit on earlier than I expected, but if that's fine with me. That's fine with you. Um, I guess having just watched the last presentation, I'm really wishing that I'd made a video as well. Much more impressive than just PowerPoints. The global challenges that I'm interested in are certainly to do with the uh, Sustainable Development Goals. But I guess I'm looking at something a bit more specific and trying to see what's happening in the local area. I'm once again looking at the global challenges, particularly, I guess, in relation to pollution and what's going to landfill. And so my presentation is really a small snapshot of a research project that I've had looking at what's happening in building construction, which is really the biggest source of pollution and contribution to landfill. Thank you very much for that nice introduction, Kathy. Once again, acknowledge that the traditional owners of the land on which we stand here at QUT. I'm actually in the Gardens Point campus. QUT acknowledges the Turrbal and the Yagara people, the First Nation owners of the lands where QUT now stands. And in particular, we understand these lands have always been lands of learning, research, and places of teaching. And so today, my presentation is very much around research that I've been engaged in collaboratively. So I guess just going back to how this afternoon session started today, with Matthew certainly talking about new and sustainable development goals. But really, I guess I'm interested in terms of how do we actually bring them together? While individually all those sustainable development goals are really important, often we have examples and case studies where companies are actually looking at combining a number of these. And that's really the focus I'm talking about today. So why tackling global challenges of construction and demolition? Well, mainly because the construction sector is currently contributing the largest amounts of waste to landfill. And as well as that, substantial greenhouse gas emissions and very high energy use. So all of these things are really contributing to a very contaminated environment with all sorts of consequences, some of which we heard before. So what's important then about carrying out some studies of building and construction? Well, internationally, we know there are some great initiatives that can make a difference. For example, off-site modular housing construction produces not just higher productivity and efficiency, but 80% less waste than traditional construction, whereas 97% of waste from modular built homes can be recycled. So really two very different business models of what happens within construction. For example, in Sweden, and there's lots of examples, not just in Sweden, off-site modular construction accounted for more than 80% of housing construction since 2019. And similarly in the UK, there have been initiatives there in the US, but in Australia, what's happening? Well, in Victoria, 5% of their construction is off-site modular, whereas in Queensland, which is, I guess, my focus, I'm really looking at what are the global issues, but what's happening locally? What can we do locally? Who's doing what? Who's taking those initiatives? Less than 3% of construction is off-site. That is prefabricated modular construction. So we're interested in knowing what's actually happening around our part of the world with small and medium enterprises. How are they moving towards some sort of restorative resourcing, some sort of product design, manufacture, product maintenance, but also to reduce the landfill contributions that are coming from construction and demolition. And so with that in mind, I guess I was really looking for what are some models that look beyond the SDGs. SDGs are really important and they're really important targets. And I think what I really like about them is that they're unifying targets that people can get towards. But really, we know in some ways in different industries, we really need to make some much bigger changes. And so we can think the biological approach, which is on the left-hand side of this diagram, or in my case, the right-hand side, which is very much about what can we do about man-made processes. Now, we know traditionally a lot of construction has been about make, use, and dispose. I mean, why would we do anything different? Well, we know over time, in fact, there's been an accumulation of much materials that are contributing, not just breaking down, not being recycled, and in fact are contributing to landfill. So then, with that in mind, what might circular economy initiatives look like in building and construction? So I really went back to the work of the Paul MacArthur Foundation, who really looks a bit beyond what's there. And she says, okay, to think of a circular economy, we need to not just get rid of waste, we need to design out waste from the beginning, not just look at the end products. Let's design processes so that waste is minimal, so that we can keep products in use and materials in use as long as possible, and that we can develop some way of actually regenerating some natural systems, because there's a finite amount of natural resources. Unless we have some process that not only reduces them and recycles or upcycles them, but somehow regenerates them, really we're not going to make any progress. So you could say, okay, this is about high in the sky, and I guess it is a bit aspirational, but in some ways, aspirations often drive us to look beyond what's there. So really we're looking at what's happening locally, who's doing what in terms of efficient and sustainable housing solutions that reduce waste in the construction, but also, where possible, design out the waste. And really looking at what are some new understandings of this waste minimisation, repurposing and reuse that are already occurring. What are the local initiatives? Because often local initiatives can actually stimulate others to not just compete, but also look beyond their business models. So what do we find? Well, focusing once again on the built environment, so looking at the extraction of natural resources, how they processed, how they manufactured, how they assembled, what use are they made in buildings, what happens in demolition, and does it just need to go to waste and be dumped into landfill? Or are there some processes we can use so that we can actually reprocess materials, recycle materials, reuse the components, and in fact, often relocate the whole building? And so what I've done is, this is actually a very short presentation. I've taken out a lot of material because I really wanted to keep to the time frame that we had set. There are different processes of building and designing for disassembly, so that when products are made and assembled, they can actually be disassembled without too much cost. So I haven't actually gone into those. I've really been trying to keep my presentation quite focused. So then what is happening in this off-site modular construction? Well, of course, we know in Australia, we were actually settled by colonists who transported to Australia a lot of materials, sometimes even whole buildings that were already assembled or used in flat packs, so they could actually be constructed. It wasn't very much the stick construction that you might see if you're driving around the suburbs and you see new buildings going up. Just the opposite. It was already designed, it was already cut to size, and then, of course, some of these original houses are still around, particularly around South Australia and Ipswich, out of the metropolitan area on the whole. So given that we've had initially this history of modular construction, what's been happening in the last 20 to 30 years? Well, you may be familiar with, and unfortunately there's a whole understanding and perception about the dollars that are happening in WA, these really basic processes. We're not looking at dollars. So I'm really looking at some quality construction. And you may have seen this in new schools that are being developed, and that's an example of one on the right there. Similar small houses are being developed, and often they're used out west. Also, I guess some very large organisations. And the case study this comes from is actually quite a large a national construction company. So, and looking at this, they're Queensland based. What else do we find? Well, there's another construction really developed by a local architect and his builders. And what they do is they actually have panels that are then assembled on site with a crane. And so they can be assembled within 24 hours. And there's an example here of the construction process that's happening on the left. And in fact, this is the fish project here. It's actually being used as a demonstration project on a site outside Brisbane. So you can see that's quite a good house. It's actually really nicely developed with normally high ceilings, with universal design, so all the doors are wide enough to take wheelchairs. There's lots of space inside for people to be able to move around. And so it's really trying to meet the needs of many different people. I'd particularly like to bring your attention to one small company that I found outside Brisbane called Eco Cottages. What's so special about Eco Cottages? Well, many things are very special about this very small company. Not only do they do modern methods of construction, which is really what I'm talking about here, this off-site and using on-site techniques in a factory setting. So you can imagine if you're a builder, you don't have to be out in the rain and the sun. It's all undercover. In fact, some deliver air. So it can all be constructed off-site and then transported and planted, if you like, on the new site. So not only are they building faster and better quality homes, because everything is cut to size, everything is pre-focused, pre-cut, and of course the quality is much better, just as the Swedish people already know. You do all this off-site, that precision, you have the quality. Not only is it sustainable, but because what's planned to use is actually planned, there's very little waste. It actually also, as you might notice, it uses a native Australian wood called cypress. And I guess if you live in Queensland, and you know what happens in a lot of Queensland homes is there's termites. White cypress, as a local Indigenous native resource, is actually resistant to termites. This, of course, is great, not just for Brisbane, but certainly for outdoor and remote areas who are subject to termites. The other thing is, because this is built in, these cottages are factory, it's actually a factory. So all the processes are net zero. These houses are actually constructed with solar panels, so it's actually very cheap for owners of these houses to own them. But what you're doing is designing for assembly, but also designing for disassembly in case people decide they want to change the dimensions of their houses over time. So what we're looking at here, that little diagram up on the corner, really it's about designing the process, manufacturing, assembling, constructing usually in the factory, and then taking to the site. The other, well, I guess there's many different initiatives in this, I'm not sure how long I have to describe this. What they've done is, of course, they've been able to glue pieces of wood together. The distinctive thing about eco cottages is they use non-toxic glue. They use non-toxic finishes. And so there's nothing toxic about these constructions. There's a very short video here, which I'd like.
We established Eco Cottages in 2007 in Pomona, and we started manufacturing small modular homes. Our broad market was for those wanting to downsize, clients wanting accommodation for ageing parents, or parents wanting accommodation for the kids, Airbnb, tourism product, and rentals. The key aspect of setting up our business and growing our businesses was through the development of a really genuine, sustainable product, because the majority of people that live in Noosa Shire and hinterland are environmentally conscious. What really surprised me about doing business and growing our business in the Noosa region was that our business was really growing and we didn't have to advertise. We outgrew our first two premises after the first one in 5 years and the next one in the next 5 years. The challenge we faced was finding a block of land that we could afford to build a purpose-built facility on. Luckily, this site came up for tender through the council, and our tender was successful, which enabled us to set up a purpose-built solar power facility. If you're thinking about starting a business in Noosa, I'd recommend focusing on developing a really genuine, sustainable product and service. Consider leasing instead of purchasing land, because it gives you more resources to invest in plant equipment, skill development and services. We've future-proofed our business through developing a really strong collaborative relationship with Noosa District State High School through apprenticeship development and workplace training. We've negotiated a really long lease with the Noosa Shire Council, and we've also developed a succession plan for our current managers to take over the business at no cost to them.
Great. Judy, I have a couple of questions, if you don't mind. I find it really interesting, this exploration of the small and medium enterprises who are taking initiatives with modern methods of construction. But do you think these sustainable construction initiatives are they likely to be scaled up? Is there potential for that within the Australian construction industry?
So my next slide was going to show that, in fact, what's happened, and I will share that one, is that, in fact, we ran sorry, I keep the Padlet for some reason. We ran a design week special with the government, with a whole lot of architects who came, and we also invited people from the Queensland government. And so, as a result of that, which is the exciting part, they set up a whole lot of dimensions for and for developing a whole range of initiatives in this area. And so now Cubicle have actually developed that. So you can go to New Farm and actually see 4 different floors of stone modular. They're now training people. They've got a whole training in Cubicle, training emphasis in this new prefab construction. And in the meantime, so I'm not sure if you can see my slides. So, I mean, I was going to add some Cubicle, but I will be out of time. But also, an Indigenous foundation in Bundaberg approached eco cottages about forming some sort of venture. And so there is a joint venture that's been established with eco cottages. No money changes hands, but in fact, the apprentices are being trained at eco cottages or outside, and also their managers are going up to Bundaberg to help them transfer this into local area. So it's not this couple man you probably saw who set up this company in 2007. He's not interested in growth or expansion, but he's quite happy to share. And so in some ways it's a bottom-up, an expansion process. So a very different business model, but very powerful. And I guess in some ways the other thing he's done is, because it's in a metro area, he's been able to partner with the whole, trains local residents and tries to keep people in the area, which are part of the cities. So it's not about scalability as such as what are some ways of extending these models. A very good question, Kathy. Thank you.
That's okay. I've got a couple more. I can see someone had raised their hand. I might just ask, if you stop sharing your video, Judy, that really enhances the sound. So we might do that. I'll read one out, a question that's gone into the Q&A, and I did see that someone had raised their hand. So I might just see if, I believe that was Tanya. Actually, Tanya, if you would like to unmute yourself and ask a question, if that's what you are interested in doing, then we can take your question first.
I can't see Tanya in the list anymore.
Oh, I will reach out to Tanya afterwards. Okay, I'll read out Paolo's question. So following on from the question about scaling up in the construction industry, are there issues about getting planning and building approvals from LGAs and subsequently getting normal household insurances?
They meet all the international standards, so that's not a problem. But the problem is the finance, because banks are lending on completion. And so, of course, if you're a company where, in fact, you're going through these stages of construction, really the company is the one who carries all the cost. And it's very hard to do. You can do it with one or two, but you can't do it really with a lot of companies. And so it's really about helping banks change their models of financing so they can see not only is the plan there, is basis there, but they can actually see the process of construction, like when the house itself is 80% done in the factory, it's built. But what happens with banks is they only finance when it's finished. And so, and the other thing they do is they do it along the way. So, of course, there's no process along the way. It gets built in the factory, then it gets planted on the land, if you like. And so that cost is all paid by the company. That's the biggest problem. All the other standards are met, and in fact they exceed the normal standards. The quality of the houses is really so impressive. I have colleagues here who are from Nordic countries, and they can't stomach the quality of Australian housing. They say, how can people actually live here? You come to Sweden and come to Finland, our houses are so much better. And I guess I do know that, but, I guess we get, a boiling frog, isn't it? We get used to what we can have. It's distinct from what we really like to have. But good question. Thank you, Paolo.
And I have one more that's come through online as well. It's a bit of a different tact. Yeah. Are you finding many construction companies willing to change any of their practices to reduce waste? For example, waste by reusing.
I think I just read a report this morning that actually says the construction industry is taking a lot of this on board. And I guess in some ways, because there's a growing interest now in prefab, in the housing end of, rather than just the commercial end, they're more and more realizing over time, it's a very slow process. Over time, I think we'll see that.
That's wonderful. This has been, I feel like we need to do a grand designs on one of these homes.
Indeed. Well,
spread the word.